Welcome to episode 250 of the Ski Podcast, and thanks for joining us today, listener. This week, our focus is turning down under as the ski season starts up in Australia and New Zealand. Plus, we're going to go retro and look at the rise and fall of the sport of ski ballet. Is it iconic or ridiculous or both? We'll find out later in this episode. We'll also have snow news from Australia, New Zealand, Europe's glaciers, plus your feedback. Now, my name's Iain Martin. I'm delighted to be joined by two guests in the studio today. Firstly, for her fourth time on the show, we are lucky enough to have the expert on skiing in Australia and New Zealand, founder of the snowsbest.com website, Miss Snow It All, Rachael Oakes-Ash. Hi, Rachael. How are you?
Hi, Iain. Thanks so much. I'm excited. 4 times. Wow. It's nice to be invited back.
Your knowledge of the ski areas down under is unprecedented. I mentioned that the season has just started. Can I just check, whereabouts are you based at the moment?
So I'm based in the Southern Highlands, which is about 2 hours south of Sydney and 4 hours to the ski fields of Australia. It's in New South Wales.
Okay. And have you been out to the slopes at all this winter yet?
Yes, I went down for the opening weekend, which is traditionally the King's birthday long weekend in Australia. And for the first time in a long time, we had incredible amounts of powder with an incredible snowstorm that actually dumped 70 centimetres across the New South Wales and Victorian ski resorts. So there was actual powder skiing on the opening weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that is fantastic. It's always good to have a really good start. And I know, the snowfall has been, let's say, variable in the Southern Hemisphere, particularly Australia, over the last couple of years. We'll come on to that a little bit more in due course. But let me introduce my second guest, joining us for the first time today. I'm joined by the founder of MGG Clothing. I think that stands for Mont Gele Gear, and the man single-handedly behind the Ski Ballet revival, Tom Batter. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Very well. Pleasure to be here.
Where is here for you right now? Where are you today?
So I'm currently in London, but I'm primarily based in Verbier in Switzerland.
Cool. And just listening to your accent doesn't sound like a sort of a natural Swiss accent.
I'm half Canadian and grew up partially in Canada. So I have a funny situation where I have a Swiss French accent in French and a Canadian accent in English. So I just confuse the hell out of everybody.
Sure. Well, being based in Verbier, fantastic place to be. One of my favourite ski resorts to get out to when I can. And talking of skiing, I guess regular listeners will know the last time I was on snow was on the 30th of May, skiing around the indoor snowdomes in the UK. But I always like to ask my guests when you were last on snow. So let's start with you, Rachael. You mentioned you went to the start of this season. When were you skiing or snowboarding last?
My last resort would have been Big Sky in Montana. I did 6 weeks OS in Japan, Utah, Colorado, and Montana.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. We featured Big Sky earlier last winter, and it's definitely on my list. That road trip that I would really like to do, to go to Jackson Hole, Big Sky, some of the Utah resorts, and Sun Valley is definitely going to happen. What did you think of Big Sky then?
Oh, look, it was the first time I've been to Big Sky, but my first time to Big Sky, and I have to say, I am so impressed. It's my new favorite resort. It is the way that they've spent over 150 million US dollars in the last 5 years on their lift system. So the way that they are able to disperse any crowds across, I think it's 5,000 plus acres of skiing is phenomenal. You literally do not stand in a lift line. And what I particularly love about them, which is quite optic and very visual, is that each of their chairlifts has the blue bubbles, but the bubbles are in their specific Big Sky blue. And the bull wheels of the chairlifts are also in their specific Big Sky blue. You don't even realize that the branding across the mountain is so on point.
Right, that sounds like a fantastic trip. Interesting. We have you on the show as an expert on Down Under, but evidently you're an expert on many resorts beyond that. Let's turn to you, Tom. I'm guessing that your last skiing and snowboarding was in Verbier. Rachael mentioned the branding in Blue Sky with the colouring. I think the branding you're likely to see on chairlifts in Verbier tend to be for luxury watches or international schools. I think that's right, isn't it?
That's right. So my last day skiing this season actually wasn't in Verbier. It was I try to do one kind of adventure trip a year to go somewhere a bit unusual. And this year we went up to Svalbard at the end of April. So that was it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's completely barren and desolate. But so that was actually my last days on skis. But yeah, generally ski in Verbier, which is a great place.
We featured Svalbard on the show before, so I take it you were ski touring and you were traveling by boat from place to place, were you?
So we were ski touring, but traveling overland. And out of a certain, there's certain cabins that you are kind of spread out around the island. Boat is a very, very popular way to do it as well.
And who was carrying the rifle then to deal with the polar bears?
So we went with a local guide, who carried the flares and the rifle and everything. And we actually did get tracked by a polar bear at one point, who followed us for about an entire day, which is a little bit unnerving.
That's gonna motivate you when you're like ski touring, up a ridge, and you're just like, is he still far enough behind? How far behind is he? But seriously, is that how it worked out?
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, this guy was a relatively small polar bear, even though small polar bear is still huge. So he was more just curious than anything else. But when they see a polar bear, the guides got a little bit worked up, right? Because there's been a number of incidents over the years. So we didn't get to the point where he had to actually, shoot the gun or anything like that. But definitely kept an eye on him for quite a while.
What do you mean incidents over the years? Is that with skiers and polar bears?
So not so much with skiers. It's been more with campers, right? So for a number of years, and I think there was actually a group from the UK, about 10 years ago, who went in the summer and they were staying in tents, a polar bear attack occurred. Because a tent doesn't really protect you much from the from the bears. So there's been a lot of efforts there to increase security. So they've built a number of little cabins throughout the place, which are much safer than tents. And I don't think you're actually allowed to go to Svalbard without if you're not armed or with an armed guide anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the case. I interviewed one of your locals, Xavier De Le Rue, a while ago about his trip there, and they were talking about how they had all of these, I'm going to call them defense mechanisms set up around their camp in case of that. So, well, fantastic trip. Rachael mentioned the opening conditions in Australia are really good at the moment. It's a really excellent to hear the southern season starting so well. They've also had a massive storm on the opening weekend in Chile as well. In the States, it's just Timberline and Mount Hood open now. But in Europe, several other glaciers are still open. And we've got snow reports from two of them, from our regular reporters. Alex Irwin, who went to Tignes for their opening weekend, and Alex Armand from Les Alpes, which still hasn't closed for its 24-25 season yet. So let's have a listen to those.
Hi Iain, Alex from 150 Days of Winter with the snow report at the opening of the Grand Mont Glacier in Tignes. After a very hot May and June, my initial expectations of what the snow conditions would be like were very low. These were compounded by a massive torrential thunderstorm the night before the opening. And oh boy, was I wrong. As the doors at the top of the funicular opened, I was greeted by a beautiful white mountain with snow the likes I haven't seen in years. Yes, I know there was more snow last year, however, that was also covered in Saharan sand. It might have been over 30 degrees in Borg, but it was a balmy 8 degrees on the mountain. Even after skiing from 7 to 11 a.m., the snow on the lower runs was not the usual sticky mess that physics dictates. Maybe this was down to the lack of skiers, but it was, and I know I overuse this word, amazing. Someday glacier skiing will not exist, and I appreciate how Tignes manages their summer crown jewel. So anyone interested, then the glacier is only open for 1 month this summer. And if you want to see me glacier skiing in my shorts, then check out my YouTube channel. And on that bombshell, ciao.
Hi, this is Alex from Tip Top Ski Coaching, here with an update in Les Alpes. So this weekend we saw the biggest mass start mountain bike race, the Mountain of Hell, starting from the glacier on snow and then continuing all the way down into the valley. A fantastic event. The glacier is holding up well despite the hot temperatures. We've had lots of clear nights, so good refreezes. and the snow is still good. We are only skiing on the actual glacier now, so the signal has been shut for a couple of weeks, and the descent to 2,600 shut just after my last snow report. We're open for another couple of weeks, so if you haven't had enough skiing yet for this season, please do come and join us in Les Deux Alpes and enjoy all the other activities as well.
Just while we're on snow reports, if you are one of our listeners in Australia or New Zealand and you fancy sending me any updates on the state of the snow down under this winter, please do get in contact. So, Rachel, we've already covered the snow conditions, opening snow conditions in Australia, but I think there are a lot of changes in Australia, a lot of developments this year. And the big news is Perish's new chairlift, which I believe is opening tomorrow. Is that right?
Well, yes, it's opening for guests for the first time tomorrow. The official opening is July 25 or 26, I think, when all the politicians and everybody else shows up. But tomorrow is when the general public can finally get their butts on the seat of a $26 million chairlift that has been 2 decades in the planning.
2 decades, blimey. I knew it had been talked about for a long time. To us, maybe in Europe, you're hearing about a chairlift, and I mentioned, there are not so many cable cars or gondolas in Australia overall. So why is that such a big deal?
Oh, it's massive, because to have any major infrastructure spending in Australia is very difficult. Thredbo had their gondola, which I think was 14 million, and they had their Alpine roller coaster, which it was 9 million. So really this chairlift is a gondola plus Alpine roller coaster together. And what it's actually going to do is help disperse crowds. I mean, Perisher is a Vale resort, so obviously everyone's on an Epic Pass. So there are a lot of numbers of people. It's going to disperse crowds across the mountain faster. It's now going to only take 5.5 minutes from bottom to top. It has been automated with thicker cables for wind, so the likelihood of wind hold is a lot less, and we get massive gale force winds here in Australia. It's also going to, oh my goodness, this is the best part, it's going to become the highest lifted point in Australia, taking it away from Thredbo by 5 metres. And Thredbo have this bell on the top of their mountain that you ring when you get to the top to say, I'm at the highest lifted point in Thredbo in Australia. And of course, there's been all this talk about whether Perisher will kidnap the bell and put it at the top of their chairlift tomorrow, but we'll wait and see. I've got someone on the ground reporting for us, so it's going to be pretty exciting.
Oh, now that is interesting. Now, I should refer at this point, I went over to Australia in 2023. I was actually visiting my mum, but I did go and visit both Perisher and Thredbo during that trip. And you were very helpful in putting me in contact with a number of people for that trip. And you've already mentioned several things there, but let's just come back to Perisher and lightening the load on the lift queues, because when I went there it was absolutely fine, and in fact my timing was quite good in that particular season. The snow was decent without being spectacular, not your 70 centimeters of powder that you've got at the moment, but I didn't experience any queues at all while I was there. But there have been some extremely viral pieces of social media in relation to Perisher about queues at times at the bottom of slopes and queues to get onto the mountain itself. And you kind of said earlier that everybody's got an Epic Pass. Firstly, is this real? Is this just fake news about all of these terrible queues? And then secondly, is it driven by a Vale Resorts Epic Pass ownership?
Okay, so the viral videos of queues is not necessarily real. They traditionally tend to be on a wind hold day, on a school holidays, which of course is packed, and usually on Front Valley, which is the access point to the majority of Perisher, unless you take the ski tube, which is like an underground train out to Blue Cow and Guthaga, etc. If I film something close up, I can make anything look like a giant queue, and the queue might only be there for 10 minutes, but I know that I'm going to get a huge amount of engagement on social media if I put it up, right? So I'm very skeptical about most of them. When I say this, though, everyone goes, oh, you must be in the pocket of Vale. I'm like, no, I'm not, but I do understand social media, and that is the way it works. Now, anybody that's going to ski during peak season is going to come in touch with a lift queue somewhere. Thredbo, in response to that, they've limited, almost, like Deer Valley, they've limited the number of people allowed on their mountain in any particular day. But it also means that they've increased the cost of their season pass exponentially. It's actually quite expensive compared to an Epic Pass.
Yeah, and just back to the Epic Pass then. I think, are there 4 resorts in Australia that are covered on the Epic Pass?
Well, they own 3. Val Resorts own 3 resorts in Australia. They own Falls Creek, they own Hotham, and they own Perisher. They obviously bought Perisher when Rob Katz was first the CEO, which of course he's now back being the CEO again. But in his first year, he bought Perisher. Perisher was $165 million purchase for them. That's Australian dollars, which is basically pesos, so $10. $165 million to them. And it was a giant database because we have so many Australians that ski overseas. We're the number 1 international inbound, or used to be, to Colorado, to Utah, to British Columbia. We're definitely number 1 to Japan and have been for a long time. We are actively marketed to. So it makes sense. Buy a ski resort, get everyone to buy your Epic Pass, funnel them across to North America because they get 20% off lodging. They can ski wherever they want effectively for free once you've got your Epic Pass. And that's how they've managed it. This is why the $26 million chairlift is so exciting, to have them actually spend money on infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and think about that 26 million. If you talk about 165 million as the investment in the first place, it's a significant amount. It's also interesting, though, what you say about the Australian market, because, when I was over there, every time I sat on a chairlift, I just spoke to everyone. I spoke, was just really interested to talk to people who are Australian skiers. And what was clear to me is that everybody who was there, this is not their main ski holiday. They were skiing in Perisher or Thredbo, and then they're going to the States, or then they're going to Japan. And I have friends in WA who've never skied in Australia, but have skied in Europe and Japan, etc. So it's interesting to hear about how that Australian market is valued, although we're aware that financially, they've been kind of relatively pressing times. The ski market is quite robust. The people who can afford to go skiing, particularly on the lift ticket prices, if you don't have an Epic Pass, are pretty expensive over there, right?
Yeah, they're like $245 for a day pass. But people like the lift queues love to talk about that on social media. But nobody goes up to a ticket window on a day and buys a lift pass for a day. The most important thing that's happened this season from both Thredbo and Perisher, but it started with Val Resorts last year, is the new 4-day pass that can be used at any time of the year. It doesn't have to be consecutive, and that really helps people that are entry-level skiers, beginner skiers, or people just testing the market. Interestingly, Europe seems to be coming online for Australians a lot more to do. Of course, with the exchange rate with the US dollar is a problem. And we've had a lot of European resorts come to Australia in May to talk to everyone about what they're doing and where to go and why it's cheaper, etc. The hardest part for us is the 24-hour flight.
For sure, yeah. I can tell you that I think my day job, or it's becoming less of my day job, and the podcast are becoming more of my day job, but is in digital marketing. And for a number of my clients, we specifically run Google Ads campaigns aimed at the Australian market, because we've certainly seen that there's a good number of Australians who want to come over and ski in Europe. And part of that also comes out of the Epic Pass as well, because there are advantages over in Europe as well. And tell me, I'm wondering if I've misunderstood this or picked this up somewhere, but there is a separate Australian Epic Pass that you can buy.
Yes.
And I've seen some people suggest that actually, if you're in Europe, you're better off, I don't know if this is even possible, buying an Australian Epic Pass and then using that to get the extra benefits out of it.
You might actually. I wonder if that's possible. I don't see why you couldn't. I'm going to look into that, because the Epic Australia Pass is cheaper than the Epic Pass, and particularly because it's in Australian dollars. If you've got euros, well, then really it's $10 to you to buy 10 euros to buy our Epic Pass, because our dollar is so bad. If you buy the Epic Australia Pass, you get 5 days at particular places and 7 days at particular places. If you buy the Epic Pass, you're unlimited. So there are restrictions that you do get with buying the Epic Australia Pass.
I may have misread that somewhere, but I think I saw someone suggesting that there is a clever way around things. Let's just go back to Thredbo. Maybe they're going to have to pass their bell for the highest point in a lifter access point in Australia over to Perisher. But you mentioned that Alpine coaster. That is a significant investment. What we're talking about here, I think a lot of European listeners will be familiar with the kind of luge on rails, which exist in a lot of resorts. A lot of resorts have introduced because it's something, firstly, you can run all year round, and secondly, it's an extra activity for families, children, anyone in resort, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Have you tried it? And how's that gone in its first year?
Oh, it's gone really well in its first year. I haven't been on it yet. It is an interesting choice. It's actually a very smart choice from Thredbo to do it, because the last 2 seasons have been dire in Australia. Dire. Have opened late and closed early, which is why this season is so exciting. And while we're talking that we had 70 centimetres on the opening weekend and we've just had another 40 to 50, we did have 90 millimetres of rain in the middle of that. But everything is skiing really, really well. Thredbo have actively sought a 12-month year-round product. They've opened a lot of mountain bike trails. The issue with Perisher is national park. So national parks, they have to get permission from national parks for a lot of things, and I don't know if they'll ever get mountain biking approved.
Yeah, for sure. I think all ski resorts these days understand that they need to become what they like to call 4-season destinations. I mean, if they can make it a 2-season destination, that's great. 4 seasons would be the ideal. I mean, we can touch on this later, but I mean, Verbier is an amazing resort for their programming, for how they're getting people coming in that closed season. Let's turn to New Zealand, Rachael. You mentioned to me in the green room that you're actually going there tomorrow, I think. And really, that's to cover the biggest news, which is over in Cardrona. They've got a new extension to the ski area, which is going to make it the largest ski area in New Zealand. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So they have this section behind Cardrona called the Soho Basin, and it used to be a cat skiing field, a very high-end cat skiing field owned by a guy called John Darby. I can never remember if it's Darby or Darcy. Darby. He owns Amersfield, which I think is top 50, one of the top 50 restaurants in the world, and wineries. And the cat skiing experience was phenomenal. You'd stop for lunch and you'd have like a full proper weighted service lunch on a big, beautiful deck. He only had that for a couple of years. Cardrona have now taken control of it, and they've put in a chairlift at the back, which is going to open up 150 hectares of skiing and snowboarding for the resort, and it's going to make them the largest ski resort in New Zealand. That opens this week. Well, the official opening is this weekend. Unfortunately, the Queenstown resorts have not had the amount of snow that they would like to have had. So we won't be able to actually ski Soho Basin this weekend, but we will certainly be there for the opening.
And you mentioned about how the chairlift in Perisher, that project had gone over a couple of decades, but this seems to have happened relatively quickly, because I was looking around. The first announcement I could see about it was in 2018 or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, in Australia, in a place like Perisher, it's a lot harder because you have to get national parks over the line consistently. With Cardrona, they have had a few issues with some of their chairlifts being built, and they've had to move them because of the little lizard communities, etc. Soho's been pretty quick, but the New Zealand government have done something interesting, which is also quite controversial, which is a fast tracking process for certain developments in tourism, whereby you can fast track your development and they'll just tick it off. Cardrona Soho Basin is not one of those. That's come in since then. That's more appropriate to Coronet Peak and the Remarkables, etc.
Okay, so there's some other news about Cardrona that I found really interesting. I covered this for one of my clients a little while ago. A new freestyle training centre, and that looks pretty amazing. Now, my understanding is it's not necessarily in Cardrona; it's a bit lower down in the valley, and its location means that you can have all year training there. You know, the New Zealand athletes, in terms of freestyle, are some amazing athletes out there already. They clearly overperform on the national stage. I think maybe most British listeners might know Zoe Zadowski-Sinnott because she's in competition with Mia Brooks. But I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about, that centre.
Well, that centre hasn't officially opened yet. It's basically a dry slope training centre. They're having some issues with getting the airbag technically sound or in. I don't want to be misquoted. So they're just having issues with the airbag. So that should open hopefully in the next couple of months. It is in Cardrona Valley, which is at the bottom of near Crown Road, which is the access road up to Cardrona. It's Australia already has one, the National Snow Sports Training Centre in Jindabyne, which is where people like Val Gele and Scotty James and Tess Cody, they all train there. And we've had exceptional success on the FIS World Cup circuit and also an X Games circuit as a result of that. And, the Kiwis this last season have just killed it. I mean, Lucas Harrington, his first X Games, walks in and walks away with gold and silver, and he wasn't even supposed to be in one of those competitions. He was sort of like a wild card because somebody else pulled out or got injured. He also ended up with Big Air, the Crystal Globe for Big Air. He's a skier. He trains at Cardrona. Zoe obviously trains at Cardrona, and they'll all get to train year round instead of having to go overseas to train.
Yeah, and they already have in Cardrona a super pipe, I think, one of the only locations in the Southern Hemisphere for that. Will this area, the training centre, the dry slope, we're talking about a massive kicker onto an airbag, will it just be for New Zealand athletes only?
No, it won't be. The Kiwis are too nice to do that. Like we also offer, you charge people, you charge the internationals. They have to pay to come and train. Like people like Lindsay Vonn and Michaela Schifrin, they all train at Round Hill, and obviously they pay Round Hill for the training facilities. With the airbag and the dry slope, I'm not sure how they're going to do it. I know it's only for athletes, and I know they will have internationals there, like Cardrona does. In Australia, we charge people to use it depending on their progress level and where they are on a FIS level as well.
Oh, well, that'll be interesting. I think you might see many more athletes basing themselves down in New Zealand, during that period because of the facilities.
Well, a lot of the internationals come to Australia and New Zealand during summer to train anyway, whether they're doing dry slope or on snow. The Cardrona facilities are phenomenal. As you mentioned already, they have a super pipe, an Olympic super pipe. That's the only place in the Southern Hemisphere that has that. So the people the names that train there are right up there, pretty impressive. And now they'll have the dry slope to be able to practice their tricks on too.
And one other thing on New Zealand then, I don't really know any of the details behind this, but I did see there are a couple of ski resorts that are up for sale down there. I wondered if you could give us any insight on that.
Okay, so what's interesting is people go, oh my God, there's so much snow in New Zealand right now, but they don't understand that the South Island is an island of many microclimates. So if you're getting a lot of snow in Canterbury, you might just be getting rain in Otago, which is Queenstown. If you're getting a lot of snow in Queenstown, you might be getting rain up in Mackenzie. So Mackenzie area is where the main two resorts are for sale. Ohau is for sale, and so is Mount Dobson. Both are family owned, both are independent resorts, not associated with any corporate. Ohau, I think, has been for sale now for 2 years, hasn't been sold yet. Dobson did go for sale a few years ago, didn't sell, took it off the market, have put it back on.
Well, tell me, what sort of prices are they looking for then?
Well, I mean, I'm not their estate agents, but I know that Dobson last time they were on the market were 2 million, but they'd probably kick me for that. They probably want 10. I have absolutely no idea. Who knows, right? And the thing about Ohau is it comes with a lodge, and you can stay in the bottom of the mountain. It has a restaurant. Oh, Dobson's so awesome. It's near Thredbo. It's owned by a farmer called, John Foote? Fotte. They've got a dog called Charlie. When you ski at these Mackenzie resorts, which is Ohau, Round Hill, and Dobson, you're just skiing with local Kiwis. It's freaking awesome. It's old school skiing. It's skiing as it should be. It's après in the car park. It's absolutely brilliant.
Sure. Well, I might have to have a look around and see if I can find a spare 2 million New Zealand dollars.
Let's do a GoFundMe.
Or alternatively, for our various technological oligarchs who listen to this show, then they can buy that out of their small change. That's brilliant, Rachael.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for that. If it's okay, I'm going to turn to Tom now. Tom, before we discuss your love for Ski Ballet, can I ask you about MGG? I mentioned in the intro, the full name is Mont Gele Gear. Many listeners will know that Mont Gele is a great free ride area in Verbier, and you've already told us you live there, so I assume that's where the company is based?
That's absolutely right, and we borrowed the name from the Mont Gele mountain, as you correctly assumed. So we're a company based out of Verbier. We started sales back in 2021. Our whole philosophy is based around this idea that products were kind of better in the past. And what I mean by that is, if I look through like my parents' cupboard of their like ski sweaters and their ski products, a lot of these products are still like really in good condition today. And we're still wearing them like 40 years later. When we built the company, we very much took this philosophy of trying to make things in Europe, trying to build high quality products that last a long time.
Oh, I mean, I like the idea of that, and I wish that I had kept some of my ski gear from back in the 80s. I still have had a C&A jumper. I don't know if you know that brand, C&A, but all British skiers would know them. Oh, I would love to have that now. It's a vintage value would be amazing. So just give us an idea. What sort of products are we talking about? What's your range include?
So our core product are heavyweight merino sweaters. So that's the majority of our business. We do generally more like retro style sweaters in terms of look. So using European or Italian specifically spun yarn, and we manufacture all our products in Europe, which we just distribute through. We have a shop in Verbier, as well as e-com and other shops throughout the Alps and the United States.
Now, normally I know we're here to talk about Ski Ballet, and I've given you the opportunity to talk about the brand because I think that's important. But actually, what I was most interested in, the reason I'm very happy to cover it, is because I was looking around the website and I was very interested in the idea of what you've called a radical transparency label. Now, I don't want to focus on sustainability too much, but I wondered if you could just explain what you're looking at with this radical transparency label, what that means, and what someone who buys a product might find out from it.
So, when we went on this journey, we realized that sustainability means something completely different to every single person. So, we took the approach that the best thing that we could do was to share everything we did, right? Really to try to show our customers, what they're buying, right? To the best degree we possibly could. So how much it costs us to make, what the workers are compensated, and to try to bring that to a visual form, right? Because sometimes you see that in companies in their CSR reports, they'll put it there in a 5,000 page document hidden on their website somewhere. And we're like, how do you bring this to life in a way that, that people can pick it up in a much faster way? The whole goal is by making things transparent, it also helps us improve, right? Because that way our customers, our community are our police as well, right? And they push us, to make sure we're true to our original philosophy and to keep, getting better.
What I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes so people can have a look at that. But essentially what we're saying is there's a label which breaks down by percentages where the money that you've paid has gone, how much of it is in materials, how much of it is in wages, how much of it goes to admin, etc. A bit perhaps like if you buy a food item, you see there's this many proteins, carbohydrates, sugars, etc. I mean, I've never seen it in any clothing before.
So that's exactly the inspiration we had, is like, it was a food label. But it's one of these things that's actually very difficult to execute, right? Because the supply chains are complicated, right? And what seems like something very obvious, like, where something's made, is really not that obvious, because there's usually a bunch of other middlemen and things included in that. So, and with a merino sweater, it's relatively easy. With a ski jacket, with 65 sub-suppliers, in a global supply chain, completely different story, right? To be able to do that.
Let's move on to Ski Ballet. Now you've explained a little bit more about MGG. I kind of understand that link to the past that you're talking about. Ski Ballet featured in the Winter Olympics in 1988 and 1992. It was only a demonstration sport at the time. Listeners may not have seen it, but they may have heard of it. I wondered, I'm going to challenge you to see if you can explain to us what Ski Ballet is.
So Ski Ballet, understand Ski Ballet, you have to understand the origins of freestyle skiing, right? So if you go back to like the 70s, right, and you're talking about, the hot dog era, you're talking about, pretty basic equipment compared to what we have today. Ski Ballet, emerged as one of the three main disciplines of freestyle skiing. And, freestyle skiing was essentially, ski ballet, aerials, and moguls for a very long time until they were split up. It was the most artistic form of those disciplines. For the athlete, that was a little bit more musical, a little bit more expressive. The athletes would actually participate in these three disciplines. And what you'd see over time is that essentially, as the sport matured, people became specialized, right? They became specialized in aerials, became specialized in moguls and ballet. And so the three things eventually went their own ways, which eventually led to this Olympic appearance in 88 and 92, which unfortunately turned out to be the high point for the sport. But in reality, it's essentially artistic skiing. It's just like artistic ballet, ice skating, but on snow.
Yeah, well, if people don't know what it looks like, I'm going to put a link to the film that you made in the show notes. I mean, people see you have like a longer, stronger poles because the athletes are kind of flipping on them. It's impossible to look at it. I mean, evidently we were looking at dated footage from the past anyway. It looks so dated. I kind of almost buy into the idea that it was a forerunner of freestyle skiing. And I did read when I was doing my research that Tanner Hall started in ski ballet. Is that for
So
real?
that's actually true. A lot of the athletes that grew up in the 90s, ski ballet was one of the things you learned how to do. So Julien started there. Tanner Hall started there. A lot of people, were touched by the sport. And the skills that you learn in ballet ended up being very useful to transfer to, other kinds of freestyle skiing later on as the sport developed.
Ski ballet, has existed. It's been around. I think there's probably a link with Verbier, which might be the reason by it. You said that there's a link between MGG and the kind of retro styles. So what prompted you in 2024 to make a film about ski ballet now?
So, we had always been kind of conscious of ski ballet. It was one of those things we knew existed, but didn't know anything about, right? And if you might remember some like classic movies like Hot Dog and stuff like that, they have the ski ballet, face off. The more we researched it, the more we liked it. The more we kind of thought that it resonated with this feel good, period of skiing. Right, because skiing has become, much more industrialized. We got epic passes, we got more controversy, we got, global warming, and there's something romantic about this, this older period, right, where skiing seemed more like the final frontier, in the place where you could really push boundaries, where things weren't yet, run by fists. They weren't run yet by organizations that were putting everything into boxes. Yeah, and we started to do research, and I reached out to a number of people from the community. And to my surprise, they all, got back to me very quickly. And so one thing led to another, and we organized a shoot with the gold medalist from 1992, Fabrice Becker, and Annika Johansson, who was not a medalist at Olympics, but she was one of the top performers on the circuit. And we realized we shot this with a drone and everything. We realized how beautiful the sport actually was. People had forgotten about it, and the camera technology back in the 70s and 80s didn't do justice to it, essentially, right? Because we had much more limited technology. So we decided to get the whole community together. We put out, an ad, let's say, to the whole ski ballet community. And before we knew it, virtually everybody who was anybody in ski ballet, whether it was Mark Pickett from Australia or, Herman Reitberger from Germany, they turned up to Verbier. And we have, this huge crew of ski ballet guys there. So we decided, let's film this. And to our pleasant surprise, the older generation loved it because of nostalgia, and the younger generation loved it because they're like, what the hell is this? I've never seen anything like this. So, one thing you realize is at these, it's sometimes seen as a bit of like a clown sport. People kind of are, dismiss it because it looks, a little bit silly. The outfits in the 80s were very eccentric and everything, but these were real athletes, at Olympic level. They were top performers who were the top of their arts, and that was something we really wanted to capture.
The film is extremely entertaining. Just out of interest, I mean, you show a bit of vintage footage there. Was it difficult getting the rights for that footage?
Super difficult. So originally we wanted to get most of the footage belongs to the IOC. And that was a very quickly a no-go because they have a certain price expectation, which is far outside of our budgets. In the end, we had to kind of dig very deep into personal archives and things like that athletes and coaches had under their possession.
Rachael?
So the people in your film, were they all ex-Olympians?
So virtually all of them. So Fabrice Becker, who's the first one I reached out to, who's had a very successsul career post ballet and Cirque du Soleil. He was the first one to kind of embrace this. I reached out to him, and he's like, he got on a plane essentially and came across, and then he brought the rest of the crew along, right? So Christian Rossi was the '88 gold medalist. Justin Holland, who's the American guy in the video, was kind of the last of the professional ski ballet, athletes. So let's say Fabrice or Annika, they're well into their 50s, but they're incredibly fit, right? And they practice every winter. Some of them even have disciples, younger people that they're teaching. Herman Reitberger, who was the '88 gold medalist, he particularly has put together a crew of young people that he's trying to train. And there's this kind of conscious effort to bring some more people back to it.
Cool. I mean, you mentioned in the video, you say there's a whole new generation trying the sport. I was like, is there really a whole new generation? But regardless of that, do you think you can bring ski ballet back into the mainstream again?
So I don't think ski ballet, the way it existed, will ever come back, right? And I don't think it's really the goal of any of us, including the athletes that participate. I think what we want to bring back is the art of it and the spirit of it, right? And what we see is a lot of the kids, why did ski ballet take off in the first place? A lot of people grew up in places where there's snow but not big mountains, right? And you have a hill this big, and you need something to do on that hill, right? And that, let's say Fabrice came from Alsace, and Justin comes from Ohio. So these are places where you get snow but have very small mountains. So once you've skied down the hill 20 times, you want to do something else. So I think in a small way it can.
Cool. Well, I've got one more question for you. I'm going to put a link to that video in the show notes so all of our listeners can have a look. Have you tried it yourself, Tom? Are you a ski ballet?
No, I have tried the most basic moves, and I have. It is actually very difficult, and unfortunately, I'm not as flexible as most of these guys. So, my ski ballet has mostly consisted of tumbling, crossing my legs and tumbling around down the slopes.
Which is exactly how I'm sure I would be at it if I did try it, which I don't think is probably going to happen. But regardless, listeners can find out more about it if they wish. That's brilliant, Tom. Thank you very much for that. Right, we're going to move towards the close now. I always enjoy listener feedback. We've had a couple of comments since our last episode. I think they were both via Spotify. Skiing Posty, he was referring to Z's comments about bringing newbies into the sport in episode 249. And he said, I get people's apprehension. I started learning at 47. And the main thing I was worried about was hurting myself or others. And he goes on to say that a year later, that hasn't come to fruition. So I'm delighted to hear that and that you're so taken by the sport and that you've joined our community on the Ski Podcast. Another newbie is Alex. He said, I've recently got into listening to your podcast and really enjoying all the skiing chat. Well, Alex, that is exactly what we do here, skiing chat. Now, if you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to help us, I would really appreciate it if you could follow us or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Or if you've already done that, then I love to hear what you think about the show, what you like or don't like. So just leave me a comment on Spotify or Instagram or Facebook. Our handle is @theski-podcast, or drop me an email to theskipodcast@gmail.com. There are now 262 episodes of the Ski Podcast to catch up with, and 229 of those were listened to in the last week alone. My guess is that's one of our listeners who's finding midsummer difficult, who is missing the snow, and who is catching up with our back catalogue. If you've only recently joined us on the Ski Podcast, why not go to skipodcast.com, have a look around that catalogue, look at the tags and categories, and you are bound to find something of interest to you. Now, in the last week, around half of our listeners were in the UK, 32% in the States. And Rachael, I'm sure you'll be interested to know that next on the list were Australia and then New Zealand. Everyone else is spread as far and wide as Bahrain, Taiwan, and there were 2 people in Chile listening to the show last week. So enjoy that snow, you too. You can follow me at Skipedia, the podcast at Ski Podcast. You can also follow us on WhatsApp for exclusive material released ahead of each podcast. Look in the show notes for that link. I would like to thank my guest today, Rachael. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. I hope to come back for a 5th time.
For sure. And Tom, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I enjoyed learning a bit about the Australian, New Zealand ski scene as well.
Excellent. And finally, listener, thank you for joining us wherever in the world you're listening right now. And until next time, goodbye.